Morning, AstraZeneca announcing that it has paused those global trials of its COVID-19 vaccine candidate. This comes after a study participant came down with an unexplained illness. The trials will be on hold while an independent committee reviews safety data. And joining us now to talk more about this is Dr. Scott Gottlieb. As you know, he is a former FDA commissioner. He's a CNBC contributor, and he serves on the boards of both Illumina and Pfizer. Pfizer obviously has a competing vaccine that it's working on right now. But Dr. Gottlieb, it's good to see you this morning.
Thanks.
When you consider that this was just one person with an adverse, unexplained illness, maybe it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but this is something that is shutting the trials down. As somebody who knows how these trials work, how big of a deal is this? What are you looking at?
Well, it's not a very large trial. This was a 10,000 patient trial. So one case of a rare adverse event that could be associated with the vaccine is going to cause concern among regulators. And they paused the trial. They're going to go through the data very carefully now from this trial. They'll probably also ask the DSMB, the Data Safety Monitoring Boards from the other trials, to take a look at the data from those trials as well, to see if there could have been a case that got missed of something like this or similar to it. This is a condition, transverse myelitis. That's what's been reported by the New York Times as the side effect that was seen in this trial. It's a condition that's been associated with COVID in the literature. So if you look, there's been some case study reports of transverse myelitis associated with COVID disease in both adults and children. So that's going to make them concerned that there could be a causal relationship between the vaccine and the condition. And the other question, which Joe was getting at before the commercial break, is whether or not this condition, if it is related to the vaccine, is it related to the vaccine construct? So this is an adenoviral vector vaccine. So it's an attenuated chimpanzee cold virus, essentially. So is it related to that cold virus that's being used to deliver the COVID segment, the COVID epitope, or is it related to the COVID epitope itself that you're delivering? And if it's the latter, if it's related to the spike protein, which is what's being delivered by that vaccine in order to stimulate the immune system, the spike protein being the part of the virus that the virus uses to infect our cells. And by delivering that protein to our bodies, we stimulate the production of antibodies that then serve to form the protection that the vaccine affords. If it's the spike protein itself, then it is something that could be related to other vaccines as well. And that's the question that the regulators are going to be looking at, trying to figure out. Is it a vaccine-related event in the first place? And if it is it related to the adenoviral vector itself or the spike protein that's being delivered or something else?
Doctor, just put a timeline on this in terms of how these things have worked historically. When a pause has been put in place, like the one that's now being put in place today, is this 24 hours, 48 hours, a week, 2 weeks out? And how much communication is taking place between AstraZeneca and regulators, but also AstraZeneca and all the other drug companies that are working on vaccines that may be modeled on some of the similar profiles that we just talked about, to the extent that they're sitting around saying to themselves, are we going to have to pause?
Right. Well, I think that the other vaccine trials, what they'll do with the ongoing trials, and Pfizer is one of them. I'm on the board of Pfizer. I have not talked to the company, so I don't know what feedback, if any, they've gotten. But there's been reports that Moderna hasn't been contacted by regulators. That company put out a statement to that effect in one of the press reports. But I wouldn't expect the other trials to be paused. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if the regulators ask the Data Safety Monitoring Board to go back and look through the data that's been accrued so far, to look for any indication that this side effect may be appearing in the other clinical trials, or some signs and symptoms in certain patients that could be suggestive of this kind of a side effect. With respect to the AstraZeneca trial, I think they're going to go through and look at that trial much more carefully, look at the individual cases and investigate this case more carefully before they would allow that trial to continue to enroll now that they've paused it. So you're looking at a delay of at least days and maybe a couple of weeks, certainly not a 24-hour delay, because you're going to want to, now that you've paused it, you're probably going to want to investigate this more thoroughly. But I would expect the trial to get back started, assuming they don't find other evidence of this condition in that clinical trial, and assuming that it's not really clear whether or not there's a causal relationship. But even if there is, you might be willing to tolerate the theoretical risk for the potential benefits of the vaccine. So it's going to be, it's going to depend on what the circumstances are of this individual case and were they at a particular risk for this kind of a side effect.
And finally, Dr. Gottlieb, I'm curious, there are some people that seem to believe that this is some form of good news. Good news is bad news in that it's going to create some additional credibility for both the industry and how they're approaching these vaccines, given that AstraZeneca is doing this, given all the other political pressure and otherwise to put something out. Does that make any sense to you? I also ask in the context, by the way, the market is up today. You know, it used to be that anytime we got even a little bit of a shred of good news, it wasn't even clear if it was good news or not when it came to vaccines, the market would skyrocket. We have demonstrably bad news today, I would have thought. Now, we're coming off of a situation yesterday where the markets were under pressure. But how do you see that, just in terms of the good news, bad news situation that people are thinking about?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's demonstrably bad news. I think we're a long way from trying to figure out whether or not this is a vaccine-related event, and even if it is, whether or not it's particular to this vaccine. And if there is a rare risk of this kind of a side effect from just vaccination generally against COVID, whether or not that's a tolerable risk, and it may well end up being the case that this could be a very rare side effect associated with both COVID and COVID vaccination. Again, we have seen it associated with COVID in very rare circumstances. I think that, you know, to your point about whether or not this is an indication that the system works, the system works. I think we should never have had a doubt that the monitoring system that's in place for clinical trials of this magnitude is independent and works. And you have very aggressive regulators. You have regulators that are careful and vigilant looking over these trials. And you have data safety monitoring boards that are the same, that are independent, looking over this data on a continuous basis. And when something does become surfaced, when they do find something that could be associated with these vaccines, they take quick action. This is how the clinical trial process works, and it worked here.